As Marines wade ashore through shallow tropical waters, a camera crew captures the moment in vivid color film. The Pacific War enters a new phase. For 8 months, Japan has swept across Asia and the Pacific without significant defeat. Now, on this remote jungle island in the Solomon Chain, the United States launches its first major offensive of the war. The footage shows young men, many barely 20 years old, hauling equipment across beaches under a blazing sun. Behind them, transport ships dot an azure sea. Above, coconut palms sway in the breeze. Nothing in this tropical postcard suggests the carnage to come. The Pacific War stretches across 1/3 of the Earth's surface. From the frozen Aleutian Islands to the jungles of Burma, from the coral atolls of the Central Pacific to the beaches of the Philippines, millions of men fight across thousands of miles of ocean. Unlike the mechanized battles of Europe, this war revolves around amphibious assaults, naval engagements, and brutal island-hopping campaigns. Each jungle-covered speck of land becomes a fortress. Each reef-ringed atoll demands an assault across open water against fortified positions. The distances are staggering, the logistics nightmarish, the human cost immense. By mid-1942, Japan controls an empire larger than any in history. From Manchuria to New Guinea, from Wake Island to Burma, the rising sun flies over conquered territories containing 400 million people. Japanese commanders believe their defensive perimeter is impregnable. They have underestimated American industrial might and the determination of Allied forces to fight across every mile of ocean, every strip of beach, every jungle ridge necessary to reach the Japanese home islands. The battles captured on color film between 1942 and 1945 reveal the true face of Pacific combat. Unlike the black and white newsreels most Americans see in theaters, color footage preserves the war in unsettling clarity. The blood-red mud of Tarawa, the emerald jungle canopy of Guadalcanal, the gray ash covering Iwo Jima, the blue-green waters turning crimson during naval battles, the yellow flame of flamethrowers clearing bunkers. These films, shot by combat cameramen, who often die alongside the men they document, provide an unfiltered record of the bloodiest campaign in the Pacific theater. 3 major Allied commanders shaped the war's strategy. Admiral Chester Nimitz commands the Pacific Fleet from his headquarters in Pearl Harbor, directing the Central Pacific Drive across the Marshall, Caroline, and Mariana Islands toward the Philippines and Japan. General Douglas MacArthur leads Southwest Pacific forces from Australia, fighting up the northern coast of New Guinea toward the Philippines, fulfilling his promise to return. In Southeast Asia, Lord Louis Mountbatten commands Allied forces attempting to reclaim Burma and reopen land routes to China. The Japanese face this 3-pronged assault with diminishing resources, fanatical determination, and a warrior code that forbids surrender. What hangs in the balance is nothing less than control of the Pacific Ocean and Asia. If Japan succeeds in holding its defensive perimeter, the war could drag on for years, potentially forcing a negotiated peace that leaves Tokyo in control of China, Korea, Manchuria, and much of Southeast Asia. If the Allies break through, Japan faces invasion and total defeat. The stakes for millions of Asian civilians under Japanese occupation could not be higher. Japan's brutal occupation policies have already killed millions through forced labor, deliberate starvation, and mass executions. Liberation will come only through Allied victory, purchased with blood on beaches and jungles across the Pacific. The battles documented in color between 1942 and 1945 represent some of the most savage combat in military history. Marines storm fortified beaches under withering fire. Soldiers fight for weeks in steaming jungles where disease kills as many men as bullets. Sailors endure kamikaze attacks that turn ships into floating infernos. Air crews fly thousands of miles across empty ocean, knowing their planes lack fuel to return if they miss their targets. The fighting develops a unique character, combining modern industrial warfare with primitive close combat. Men fight with flamethrowers and grenades in caves and bunkers. Hand-to-hand combat remains common. The Japanese embraced death rather than surrender, forcing Allied troops to kill nearly every defender of every island. No quarter is asked or given. The color film captures what words cannot fully convey. The exhaustion in the eyes of men after weeks in combat. The fear visible on faces of troops boarding landing craft. The surreal beauty of tropical sunsets over burning ships. The contrast between paradise and hell. Camera crews follow Marines across killing grounds, documenting advances measured in yards, purchased with dozens of lives. They film the aftermath of banzai charges, the grim work of burial details, the 1,000-yard stares of shell-shocked survivors. This footage, much of it unseen by the public for decades, provides the most complete visual record of the Pacific War's terrible reality. One Marine sergeant later writes, "We landed in paradise and turned it into hell. The islands were beautiful. The fighting was as ugly as anything human beings have ever done to each other. The color cameras captured both, and that's what makes the footage so hard to watch." The camera crews filming in color face the same dangers as combat troops. Several die during landings or are wounded while filming under fire. Their footage survives as testimony to what happened on islands whose names become synonymous with sacrifice: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. This is their record, and the record of the men who fought and died to destroy Japanese military power and end the war in the Pacific. The strategic situation facing the Allies in mid-1942 presents a nightmare of overextension and limited resources. Japan controls nearly all of Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. Its defensive perimeter runs from the Aleutian Islands in the north through Wake Island and the Marshall Islands in the Central Pacific, down to the Solomon Islands near Australia, then west through New Guinea to the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, Burma, and into China. This empire provides Japan with rubber, oil, rice, and strategic minerals needed to sustain its war machine. More importantly, the vast distances between island outposts seem to guarantee security against American counterattack. The Japanese High Command believes the Pacific Ocean itself forms an impregnable barrier. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, understands American industrial potential, but hopes that Japan's warrior spirit and defensive positions will make the cost of reconquest so high that Washington will negotiate peace. Japanese planners construct elaborate fortifications on key islands. They dig tunnels and bunkers, position artillery to cover landing beaches, and pre-register mortars on likely approach routes. Garrisons receive orders to defend each position to the death. The code of Bushido demands that soldiers die rather than surrender. This philosophy will turn every island into a fortress that must be reduced by force. American strategy evolves through bitter necessity and inter-service rivalry. The United States Navy, still recovering from Pearl Harbor, lacks the strength to assault Japan's main defensive positions directly. Instead, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, proposes a two-pronged offensive. Admiral Nimitz will drive across the Central Pacific, seizing island bases that can support further advances. General MacArthur, commanding from Australia, will fight up the New Guinea coast and through the Philippines. Both commanders require enormous resources. Both believe their route offers the fastest path to victory. Both receive less than they need. The decision to invade Guadalcanal comes from strategic necessity. Japanese forces are constructing an airfield on the island that will threaten Allied supply lines to Australia. If the airfield becomes operational, Japanese aircraft can attack shipping across the South Pacific. Admiral King and General Marshall approve an assault, despite the operation's risks. The 1st Marine Division, commanded by Major General Alexander Vandergrift, receives orders to seize the airfield before it can be completed. The Marines have trained for amphibious warfare, but never attempted an operation of this scale. They face an enemy of unknown strength on an island about which American intelligence knows almost nothing. Allied forces assembled for the Guadalcanal operation reflect the desperate shortages of mid-1942. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commands the amphibious force with a scratch collection of transports and cargo ships. Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's carrier task force provides air support with 3 carriers, Saratoga, Enterprise, and Wasp. These represent nearly half of America's operational carrier strength. Their loss would be catastrophic. The Marines boarding transports in New Zealand during late July number approximately 19,000 men, organized into 3 infantry regiments, plus artillery and support units. They carry limited ammunition, 30 days of rations, and inadequate maps. Intelligence reports suggest the island garrison numbers fewer than 3,000 Japanese troops. This estimate proves wildly inaccurate. The journey from New Zealand to the Solomon Islands takes 8 days. Marines spend the voyage studying crude maps, cleaning weapons, and trying to imagine what awaits them. Many have never seen combat. Officers brief their men on Japanese tactics based on reports from earlier battles. Japanese soldiers fight to the death. They launch night attacks with fixed bayonets. They feign surrender, then attack. They torture prisoners. The young Marines listen and wonder if they will measure up. Most have barely finished training. Many joined after Pearl Harbor seeking revenge. Now, revenge has a price, and they will pay it on beaches and in jungles, whose names they cannot pronounce. The task force approaches Guadalcanal during the night of August the 6th to 7th, 1942. Marines sleep fitfully in crowded troop compartments below decks. Above, sailors prepare to support the landing with naval gunfire. In the darkness, transports and warships slip between Tulagi and Guadalcanal, arriving undetected. The element of surprise represents the operation's greatest advantage. Japanese commanders expect no Allied offensive this soon. Their garrisons are scattered, unprepared, and vulnerable. This advantage will not last long. At dawn on August the 7th, the bombardment begins. Cruisers and destroyers open fire on suspected Japanese positions. The sound of naval guns echoes across the island. Marines gather on deck, watching orange flashes light the tropical darkness. Color film captures the moment. Young faces illuminated by gunfire. Tension visible in every expression. Equipment loaded, weapons checked one final time. Landing craft swing out on davits, lowered into calm seas. The first Marines descend cargo nets and board the small boats that will carry them to the beach. The invasion of Guadalcanal begins. The landing itself encounters minimal resistance. Japanese forces, surprised by the assault, flee into the jungle interior. Marines wade ashore expecting heavy fighting, but find the beaches empty. By afternoon, they capture the partially completed airfield without serious opposition. Vandergrift establishes his command post and begins organizing defenses. The ease of the landing breeds false confidence. Officers believe they face a demoralized enemy. They do not yet understand that the real battle has not begun. The Japanese garrison has withdrawn to regroup. Reinforcements are already steaming south from Rabaul. The Imperial Navy prepares to destroy the Allied fleet and isolate the Marines on Guadalcanal. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, other operations unfold simultaneously. In the Central Pacific, Nimitz's forces consolidate control of Midway, the decisive naval victory of June having destroyed Japan's carrier strike force. In Alaska, American and Canadian troops fight to expel Japanese forces from Attu and Kiska in the Aleutians. In China, Japanese armies continue their brutal occupation, facing resistance from both nationalist and communist forces. In Burma, British and Indian troops struggle against Japanese offensives that threaten India itself. The war sprawls across a dozen fronts, each demanding resources that do not exist in sufficient quantities. The Japanese response to Guadalcanal demonstrates the island's strategic importance. Within 24 hours of the landing, Admiral Gunichi Mikawa sourcelessly assembles a strike force of cruisers and destroyers at Rabaul. His mission: destroy the Allied transports and naval support, leaving the Marines stranded without supplies or reinforcement. Mikawa's force races south through the Solomon Chain during August the 8th, approaching Guadalcanal after dark. Allied radar operators detect the Japanese ships, but identification proves difficult. By the time American commanders realize an attack force is approaching, it is too late to adequately prepare. The Battle of Savo Island erupts shortly after midnight on August the 9th. In darkness and confusion, Japanese cruisers devastate the Allied screening force. The heavy cruisers Astoria, Quincy, Vincennes, and the Australian cruiser Canberra all sink or burn beyond saving. More than 1,000 sailors die in less than an hour. Japanese gunnery, superior night fighting tactics, and better training produce a catastrophic defeat. Only Japanese caution prevents complete disaster. Mikawa withdraws without attacking the vulnerable transports, fearing American carrier aircraft at dawn. His decision saves the invasion force but does not prevent Admiral Fletcher from withdrawing his carriers south, away from further Japanese attacks. On Guadalcanal, Marines wake to devastating news. Their naval support has been shattered. Supply ships are withdrawing immediately, taking with them critical ammunition, food, and equipment. The Marines are on their own, holding an incomplete airfield on a hostile island, facing an enemy that now controls the surrounding waters. Vandergrift realizes his division must dig in and hold until the Navy can return. He does not know how long that will take. He does not know if reinforcements will arrive in time. He knows only that retreat is impossible, and defeat means death or captivity under an enemy that takes few prisoners and treats them brutally. One Marine officer later recalls, "When we learned the Navy was pulling out, taking half our supplies with them, we understood our situation. We were expendable. If we could hold the airfield, the Navy would come back. If we couldn't, they would write us off. It was that simple and that terrifying." A Japanese commander notes in his diary, "The Americans have made a fatal mistake. They have landed on Guadalcanal without adequate preparation. We will destroy them and throw their bodies into the sea. The Emperor will be pleased. Both men are wrong. The Marines will hold. The Japanese will pour men and ships into a battle that becomes a killing ground for both sides." The island, called Guadalcanal, a name unknown to most Americans before August 1942, will become synonymous with jungle warfare, courage, and the terrible cost of victory in the Pacific. The campaign for Guadalcanal dominates the first 6 months of the Allied offensive, setting the pattern for battles to come. Between August 1942 and February 1943, this single island becomes the focus of Japanese strategic efforts in the South Pacific. Tokyo cannot allow the Americans to establish an air base that threatens the entire defensive perimeter. Washington cannot abandon the Marines without surrendering the initiative. Both sides pour reinforcements into a battle that neither can afford to lose. The result is 6 months of continuous combat on land, at sea, and in the air. Guadalcanal becomes a furnace that consumes men, ships, and aircraft at a rate neither side anticipated. The Marines complete the captured airfield and name it Henderson Field, in honor of a pilot killed at Midway. On August the 20th, the first American aircraft land on the rough coral strip. These planes, primarily Wildcat fighters and Dauntless dive bombers, provide the Marines with air cover and the ability to attack Japanese ships attempting to reinforce or bombard the island. Control of this single coral airstrip becomes the key to everything that follows. As long as American aircraft operate from the field, Japanese ships cannot safely approach during daylight. Every subsequent battle on Guadalcanal revolves around attempts to capture or defend this strategic position. Japanese reinforcements begin arriving immediately. Admiral Raizo Tanaka develops the Tokyo Express system, using fast destroyers to race down the Solomon Chain after dark, land troops and supplies, then escape before dawn brings American aircraft. The Americans call these runs the Rat Run. Throughout late summer and early autumn, Japanese destroyers deliver thousands of troops under cover of darkness. Japanese intelligence drastically underestimates Marine strength, reporting only 2,000 defenders, when in fact more than 10,000 Marines hold the perimeter. This miscalculation shapes every Japanese assault that follows, with commanders sending insufficient forces against prepared positions. The first major Japanese assault comes on August the 21st. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki leads approximately 900 soldiers in a night attack against Marine positions along the Ilu River, mistakenly called the Tenaru by American forces. His men advance in the darkness, bayonets fixed, confident of easy victory. They run directly into prepared Marine positions, backed by artillery and machine guns. The Battle of the Tenaru River becomes a slaughter. Marine defenders, dug in along the riverbank, wait until Japanese soldiers cross the sandbar before opening fire. Machine guns cut down the leading ranks. Artillery shells explode among troops packed on the narrow beach. Despite devastating casualties, wave after wave continues forward, some reaching Marine positions to engage in hand-to-hand combat before being killed. By dawn, nearly 800 Japanese soldiers lie dead on the beach and in the shallow water. Marine casualties number fewer than 50. Ichiki, watching his command destroyed, burns his regimental colours and commits suicide. The attack reveals a tactical doctrine that will repeat throughout the campaign. Frontal assaults pressed home, regardless of cost, no retreat, death before dishonour. The pattern intensifies through September. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi lands on Guadalcanal with 6,000 troops of the 35th Infantry Brigade. Still operating under flawed intelligence, he receives orders to attack immediately. His plan calls for a coordinated assault from multiple directions during the night of September the 13th to 14th. The attack focuses on a ridge south of the airfield, a jungle-covered slope that commands the approach to Henderson Field. If Japanese forces capture this ridge, their artillery can destroy the airfield and render it unusable. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, named for Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, who commands the defenders, begins after dark on September the 13th. Kawaguchi's soldiers advance through thick jungle, struggling to maintain formation in darkness. Marine raiders and paratroopers, reinforced by artillery, hold the ridge. The Japanese attack with characteristic fury, screaming, blowing bugles, and charging uphill through machine gun fire. Some penetrate Marine lines in the darkness, fighting with bayonets and grenades at close quarters. The battle rages all night. Marines fall back to secondary positions, then counterattack at dawn. Artillery fire from batteries near Henderson Field breaks up Japanese formations. By morning, Kawaguchi's assault has failed. He loses more than 1,000 men killed. Marine casualties exceed 200. The defeat shocks Japanese commanders. They begin to understand that capturing Guadalcanal requires a major effort, not the small-scale operations attempted so far. Tokyo commits the 38th Division, veteran troops from Hong Kong and Java, to the campaign. Meanwhile, the naval war intensifies. Both sides reinforce their positions, bringing in troops, supplies, and equipment. The waters around Guadalcanal become known as Iron Bottom Sound, as naval battles send ship after ship to the bottom. Daily life for Marines on Guadalcanal descends into a grinding struggle against multiple enemies. Japanese soldiers attack regularly, probing defenses, launching small raids, keeping defenders exhausted. Japanese warships bombard Henderson Field almost nightly, forcing Marines to shelter in dugouts while shells destroy aircraft and installations. During October, Japanese battleships conduct devastating bombardments, firing hundreds of 14-inch shells into the Marine perimeter. The impacts crater the airfield and destroy fuel dumps. Marines emerge from shelters to find aircraft smashed, tents shredded, and comrades dead or wounded. Disease ravages both sides with equal ferocity. Malaria infects thousands of men. Its cycles of fever and chills debilitating entire units. Dysentery spreads through contaminated water supplies. Tropical ulcers eat into flesh, resistant to treatment. In the constant humidity, fungal infections flourish. Men lose weight rapidly, their bodies consuming muscle for energy. Uniforms rot, and boots fall apart in the relentless damp. By October, nearly half the Marines on Guadalcanal suffer from malaria, dysentery, or other tropical diseases, yet they remain on the line because no replacements exist. Japanese soldiers endure even worse conditions. Supply shortages leave them starving, subsisting on handfuls of rice and whatever they can forage. Many die from disease and malnutrition rather than combat, their bodies too weakened to fight infections. Both sides fight while sick, exhausted, and half-starved, sustained only by determination and fear of what defeat means. The Japanese launched their largest offensive in late October. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake arrives on Guadalcanal with the 38th Division and assumes personal command. His plan calls for coordinated attacks from south and west, while naval forces bombard from the sea and aircraft strike from the air. Japanese commanders named the operation after the emperor's birthday, confident of victory. Hyakutake commits approximately 20,000 troops, the largest force yet assembled. The offensive begins on October the 23rd and continues for 3 days. Japanese artillery bombards marine positions. Infantry attacks develop from multiple directions. The heaviest fighting occurs along the Matanikau River west of Henderson Field and in the jungle ridges to the south. Artillery support saves marine positions repeatedly, breaking up Japanese formations before they can exploit their breakthroughs. The jungle fighting assumes a savage character. Soldiers engage at ranges measured in yards. Grenades bounce between foxholes. Men shoot each other at point-blank range. The dense vegetation makes coordination nearly impossible. Units become separated in the darkness and thick brush. Wounded men from both sides lie in no man's land between the lines, their cries audible throughout the night. Japanese medical care is minimal. Marine corpsmen risk their lives to reach wounded Marines, dragging them to aid stations. The smell of death, already omnipresent from earlier fighting, intensifies as bodies decompose rapidly in the tropical heat. By October the 26th, the Japanese offensive collapses. Hyakutake's divisions suffer approximately 3,000 killed and many more wounded. They gain nothing. Marine casualties exceed 1,000, including many officers and NCOs who lead from the front and die accordingly. The failure devastates Japanese morale. Soldiers realize they cannot capture Henderson Field by direct assault. Officers begin questioning the strategy of feeding troops piecemeal into a battle they cannot win. Supplies dwindle. Reinforcements arrive sporadically, harassed by American aircraft. The Tokyo Express continues running, but American destroyers and PT boats make the runs increasingly dangerous. Naval battles continue throughout the campaign. In mid-November, a major Japanese convoy attempts to land massive reinforcements under cover of battleship bombardment. The naval battle of Guadalcanal, fought over 3 days, results in both sides losing heavily. 2 American admirals die when their flagships sink. The battleship Kirishima goes down under concentrated American fire. Transport ships burning offshore light the night sky. Thousands of Japanese soldiers drown when transports sink or beach themselves under air attack. The Japanese lose the battle and fail to land sufficient reinforcements to change the situation ashore. Color film captures the aftermath of these battles. Beaches littered with wrecked landing craft. Burned-out tanks half submerged in surf. Bodies washing ashore with each tide. The footage shows Marines, hollow-eyed and gaunt, still holding their positions. Aircraft land between bombardments, patched and repaired repeatedly, flown by pilots as exhausted as the ground troops. Supply ships unload desperately needed ammunition and food, while Japanese artillery shells bracket the beach. The images reveal a campaign balanced on a knife edge, where small advantages decide survival. One Marine later writes, "We lived like animals in the jungle. We ate cold rations when we ate at all. We went weeks without bathing. We slept in mud and woke to find leeches on our skin. We buried our friends in shallow graves marked with crosses made from sticks, and every night we knew the Japanese would come again, screaming out of the darkness, and we would have to kill them or be killed. There was no other option." A Japanese officer records in his diary, "Our soldiers fight bravely, but they are starving. Many die from disease before they ever reach the front. The Americans have air superiority, naval superiority, and better logistics. We attack with courage, but courage alone cannot defeat artillery and machine guns. This island is consuming the army." By December, Guadalcanal's outcome becomes clear. American reinforcements arrive in increasing numbers. The 1st Marine Division, reduced to shadows of their former selves, begin evacuating to Australia. Army units relieve them. Japanese forces, starving and decimated by disease, can no longer mount effective offensives. Tokyo faces a decision: commit more resources to a failing campaign or cut losses and withdraw. The decision takes weeks, during which more men die for an island Japan can no longer hold. While Guadalcanal consumes resources and attention through late 1942 and into 1943, American strategists plan the next phase of the Pacific War. Admiral Nimitz receives authorization to launch a Central Pacific offensive across the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, driving toward the Marianas and eventually the Philippines. This campaign differs fundamentally from the jungle warfare of the Solomons. Instead of fighting for months on single islands, Nimitz's forces will conduct rapid amphibious assaults, overwhelming defenders through concentrated firepower before moving to the next objective. The strategy depends on carrier task forces, massive naval bombardment, and improved amphibious techniques learned at terrible cost on Guadalcanal. The build-up for the Central Pacific Drive takes throughout 1943. New Essex-class carriers join the fleet, each carrying more aircraft than the older carriers they replace. New battleships, cruisers, and destroyers arrive from American shipyards at a rate Japan cannot match. Landing craft production accelerates, providing the specialized vessels needed for amphibious warfare. Most importantly, new techniques and equipment emerge from hard lessons: improved naval gunfire coordination, underwater demolition teams to clear beach obstacles, armored amphibious tractors to carry troops across reefs, and better close air support procedures. The offensive begins in November 1943 with Operation Galvanic, the assault on Tarawa and Makin atolls in the Gilbert Islands. Tarawa, specifically the tiny island of Betio, becomes the primary objective. Japanese engineers have transformed this 2-mile-long coral island into a fortress. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki commands 4,500 troops, including 2,000 elite naval infantry. They construct hundreds of bunkers and pillboxes from concrete, reinforced with steel, position artillery to cover the lagoon and beaches, string barbed wire across the reef, and prepare to fight to the death. Shibasaki boasts that 1 million men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years. The 2nd Marine Division, commanded by Major General Julian Smith, receives the mission. Intelligence indicates that unprecedented naval bombardment will destroy most Japanese defenses before Marines land. Planners schedule 3 hours of battleship and cruiser fire, followed by continuous airstrikes. Officers assure Marines that few Japanese will survive. They are catastrophically wrong. The concrete bunkers can withstand everything except direct hits from the largest shells, and the bombardment neutralizes only a fraction of defensive positions. The assault on Betio begins at dawn on November the 20th, 1943. The first wave of Marines board amphibious tractors designed to crawl over the coral reef surrounding the island. Following waves load into conventional landing craft. The plan depends on high tide covering the reef, allowing boats to cross into the lagoon. The tide fails to rise as predicted. Landing craft ground on the reef hundreds of yards from shore. Marines must wade across the exposed coral under intense fire. Color footage captures the horror. Marines climb from grounded landing craft directly into machine gun fire. Many die in the water, shot before taking a dozen steps. Bodies float in the shallow lagoon. Blood colors the turquoise water dark red. Wounded men drown in 3 feet of water, unable to stand under the weight of their equipment. Those who reach the beach find a 4-foot seawall with no cover beyond. Japanese fire comes from bunkers invisible until Marines are almost on top of them. The noise is deafening. The smell of cordite and death is overwhelming. The first hours on Betio represent some of the bloodiest fighting in Marine Corps history. Entire platoons cease to exist within minutes of landing. Officers die leading their men forward. The battalion commander radios back a simple message: issue in doubt. For several hours the invasion hangs by a thread. Marine perseverance and Japanese rigidity save the day. Small groups of Marines, led by sergeants and lieutenants after senior officers fall, find gaps in the defences and push inland. Engineers blow paths through obstacles. Tanks that manage to land provide mobile fire support. Naval gunfire, now directed by observers ashore, begins destroying bunkers with precision. Most critically, Japanese doctrine forbids flexible defence, preventing the counterattacks that might throw the Marines back. By nightfall, Marines hold a precarious toehold. Reinforcements pour across the reef through the night, accepting casualties to build combat power ashore. The battle continues for 3 more days. Marines fight bunker to bunker using flamethrowers, explosives, and point-blank tank fire. Japanese defenders fight from fixed positions until killed. Almost none surrender. The fighting is intimate and savage. By November the 23rd, organised resistance ends. Of the 4,500 Japanese defenders, only 17 wounded men allow themselves to be captured. Marine casualties total more than 3,000, including over 1,000 dead. For an island 2 miles long and 800 yards wide, the cost stuns America. The lessons from Tarawa reshape American amphibious doctrine for all subsequent operations. Future assaults receive longer, more intensive naval bombardment. Underwater demolition teams clear beach obstacles before landing. Improved amphibious vehicles ensure troops can cross reefs regardless of tide. Most importantly, commanders accept that heavily fortified islands require overwhelming force and will produce heavy casualties. There are no shortcuts. Each bunker must be destroyed. Each defender must be killed. The Central Pacific Offensive accelerates through 1944. In January and February, Marines and Army troops assault the Marshall Islands. Kwajalein, Roy Namur, and Eniwetok fall after brief but intense battles. Japanese garrisons, isolated and unsupported, fight to annihilation. The pattern becomes routine: naval bombardment, airstrikes, amphibious assault, methodical reduction of defences, inevitable Japanese last stands. Behind the assault forces, construction battalions build airfields and bases at remarkable speed. The campaign reaches its strategic climax with the invasion of the Mariana Islands in June 1944. Saipan, Tinian and Guam sit within bombing range of the Japanese home islands. Their capture will allow B-29 Superfortress bombers to strike Japan directly. Japanese commanders understand the Marianas' strategic importance and garrison the islands heavily. Saipan alone holds 30,000 Japanese troops under Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito. The island's mountainous terrain provides excellent defensive positions. Civilians, including Japanese settlers, and indigenous Chamorros, number approximately 25,000. The invasion of Saipan begins on June 15, 1944. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions land on the southwest coast after massive naval bombardment. Opposition is intense, but the island's size allows maneuver. Marines push inland, establishing a beachhead several miles wide. The Army's 27th Infantry Division lands as reserve. Over the following weeks, American forces fight across Saipan's ridges and cane fields, reducing Japanese positions through firepower and frontal assault. The battle produces scenes of horror unprecedented even in the Pacific War. Japanese civilians, told Americans will torture and murder them, commit mass suicide rather than surrender. At Marpi Point, the island's northern tip, hundreds jump from cliffs onto rocks below. Mothers throw children into the sea before jumping themselves. American troops attempt to dissuade civilians over loudspeakers, offering safety. Most refuse. The color film captures distant figures falling from cliffs, tiny against the blue Pacific. Japanese military resistance ends in a final banzai charge on July the 7th. Saito orders the attack, then commits ritual suicide. That night, approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers charge American lines with rifles, swords, and bamboo spears. Artillery fire stops the attack by dawn. Bodies cover the ground in front of American positions. The charge accomplishes nothing except adding to the death toll. Saipan's fall costs approximately 3,000 American dead and 13,000 wounded. Japanese military losses exceed 29,000 killed. Civilian deaths number approximately 10,000, many by suicide. The battle demonstrates that Japanese resistance intensifies as American forces approach the home islands. Soldiers and civilians alike embrace death rather than accept defeat. One Marine veteran later recalls, "Tarawa was hell, but it lasted 3 days. Saipan was hell for 3 weeks. Every cave held defenders who had to be burned out. Every ridge cost lives to capture. And when it was finally over, we watched civilians kill themselves and their children rather than trust us. That's when we understood this war would end only when Japan was utterly destroyed, or we killed everyone on the home islands. There would be no negotiated peace." A Japanese officer writes before his death, "We have fought with honor and courage, but the Americans are too strong. Their ships and aircraft darken the sky. Their artillery never stops. Our soldiers die bravely, but they die nonetheless. Saipan is lost. Perhaps Japan itself is lost. But we will fight to the end, as our code demands." The Marianas campaign continues through August, with the conquest of Tinian and Guam. Both islands fall after battles following the Saipan pattern: intense resistance, high casualties, and ultimate American victory. The strategic result is decisive. B-29 bombers begin arriving on newly constructed airfields. By late 1944, they strike Japanese cities regularly. The war enters its final phase. Japan's defensive perimeter lies in ruins. American forces stand poised to invade the Philippines and eventually Japan itself. The question is no longer whether Japan will lose, but how many more will die before the end comes. General Douglas MacArthur fulfills his promise on October the 20th, 1944, wading ashore at Leyte in the central Philippines. Color cameras capture the moment as he walks deliberately through knee-deep water toward the beach. Behind him, the largest amphibious force yet assembled in the Pacific prepares to reclaim the Philippines from 3 years of brutal Japanese occupation. The invasion force numbers more than 700 ships and 200,000 troops. MacArthur broadcasts to the Filipino people, "I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil." The battle for Leyte begins the final destruction of Japanese military power in the Pacific. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the conqueror of Malaya and Singapore, commands approximately 400,000 troops scattered across the Philippine archipelago. Tokyo orders him to fight for every inch of ground, bleeding the Americans and delaying the inevitable invasion of Japan. Yamashita concentrates his best divisions on Leyte, reinforcing the island garrison despite American air and naval superiority. The Japanese High Command views the Philippines as the decisive battle that might force a negotiated peace. The Japanese Navy launches its last coordinated offensive during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in late October. 4 separate task forces converge on the invasion beaches, hoping to destroy vulnerable transports and support ships. The resulting naval battle sprawls across the Philippine Sea for 3 days, becoming the largest naval engagement in history. American carriers decimate Japanese air power. Surface action groups sink multiple Japanese battleships and cruisers. Most dramatically, the Japanese introduce kamikaze attacks on a large scale. Suicide pilots crash their aircraft into American ships, causing devastating damage. The escort carrier St. Lo sinks after a kamikaze penetrates its flight deck. More than 100 sailors die. Unable to match American aircraft production or train replacement pilots adequately, Japanese commanders turn young men into guided missiles. The pilots receive minimal training, enough to take off and fly toward a target, but not to land. The tactic proves militarily effective in the short term, damaging or sinking dozens of ships, but it consumes Japan's remaining trained pilots at an unsustainable rate. Land combat on Leyte develops into a prolonged struggle through jungle and mountains. Japanese reinforcements continue landing despite heavy losses to submarines and aircraft. The fighting resembles Guadalcanal, night attacks, close combat in thick vegetation, and slow advances measured in hundreds of yards per day. Rain turns the island into a swamp. Vehicles bog down in mud. Disease again becomes a factor. The battle, expected to last weeks, drags on for months. American firepower eventually decides the campaign. Artillery and air support destroy Japanese positions systematically. Naval, gunfire reaches far inland, demolishing supply dumps and troop concentrations. By December, organized Japanese resistance on Leyte collapses. Yamashita's forces suffer approximately 50,000 killed. American casualties exceed 15,000. The Philippines campaign continues on other islands, but Leyte's conquest opens the way to Luzon and Manila. While MacArthur fights in the Philippines, Nimitz's forces prepare to assault Iwo Jima, a volcanic island midway between the Marianas and Japan. The island sits directly on the flight path B-29 bombers take to strike Japan. Japanese fighters based there intercept bombers returning from missions, shooting down damaged aircraft. American fighters lack range to escort bombers to Japan and back. Iwo Jima's capture will provide an emergency landing field for damaged bombers and a base for escort fighters. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commands Iwo Jima's defense. Unlike most Japanese commanders, Kuribayashi abandons traditional tactics. He stations no troops on the beaches and forbids banzai charges. Instead, he transforms the island into a vast underground fortress. Engineers dig 11 miles of tunnels connecting 1,500 caves, pillboxes, and bunkers. Artillery pieces hide in caves, emerging to fire before retreating underground. Machine gun nests cover every approach. Kuribayashi tells his 21,000 men they will not win, but they will make the Americans pay in blood for every yard. He estimates each defender will kill 10 Americans before dying. The invasion begins on February the 19th, 1945, after 3 days of naval bombardment. The 5th Amphibious Corps, composed of the 3rd, 4th and 5th Marine Divisions, lands on the southeast coast. Initial resistance seems light. Marines advance inland across black volcanic sand that provides no cover and collapses underfoot, making movement exhausting. Men struggle to climb the steep terraces rising from the beach. Then the Japanese open fire. Artillery and mortar shells rain down on the beaches. Machine guns fire from concealed positions. Marines die before locating the sources of fire. The volcanic ash makes digging foxholes nearly impossible, offering no protection. Vehicles bog down, their treads spinning uselessly. The beaches become killing zones. Japanese observers in caves direct fire with deadly accuracy. The color film shows Marines hugging the ground, crawling forward, dying in groups when shells land among them. The battle for Iwo Jima devolves into the most savage infantry combat of the Pacific War. Every cave must be cleared. Every bunker must be destroyed. Japanese defenders fire from concealed positions, then retreat through tunnels to fight again elsewhere. Flamethrower teams and demolition squads work constantly. Tanks provide mobile fire support, but several fall into camouflaged pits or are destroyed by hidden anti-tank guns. Progress is measured in yards per day. Casualties mount relentlessly. Mount Suribachi, the volcanic cone dominating Iwo Jima's southern tip, becomes the first major objective. Marines fight for 4 days to reach the summit. On February the 23rd, a patrol reaches the top and raises an American flag. Hours later, a larger flag is raised, and Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal captures the iconic image that will define the battle. 3 of the 6 men in the photograph die before the battle ends. The flag raising provides a morale boost, but the battle is far from over. The northern 2/3 of Iwo Jima remains in Japanese hands. The terrain there is worse. Rocky ridges, deep ravines, and hundreds of fortified positions. Marines advance foot by foot, clearing positions with grenades, flamethrowers, and explosives. Japanese defenders emerge from tunnels behind American lines, attacking from unexpected directions. Night fighting is constant. The strain breaks some men. Others fight with grim determination, knowing the only way off the island is victory or death. Casualties exceed all predictions. By the end of the first week, all 3 Marine divisions suffer more than 50% casualties in their assault battalions. Fresh replacements find themselves in combat within hours of landing. The Marine Corps commits its reserve division. Hospitals overflow with wounded. The volcanic sand, containing sulfur, causes wounds to become infected rapidly. The battle's intensity produces extraordinary acts of courage. 27 medals of honor are awarded for actions on Iwo Jima, more than any other single battle in American history. Half are awarded posthumously. The awards reflect the battle's desperate nature and the ages of the recipients, many in their late teens or early 20s. Japanese resistance finally crumbles in mid-March after nearly a month of continuous combat. Kuribayashi leads a final attack against American rear areas with his remaining troops. He dies fighting. Of 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 allow themselves to be captured, most too badly wounded to commit suicide. American casualties total approximately 26,000, including 6,800 dead. Nearly 1 American casualty for every Japanese defender. The debate over whether the island was worth the cost becomes moot as damaged B-29 bombers begin landing while fighting still rages. By war's end, more than 2,400 bombers make emergency landings, saving an estimated 24,000 airmen who would have otherwise ditched at sea. P-51. Mustang fighters begin escorting bombing missions to Japan, dramatically reducing bomber losses. One Marine later writes, "Iwo Jima was worse than anything we could imagine. The Japanese didn't charge at us screaming. They waited in their caves and tunnels and killed us when we got close. We used flamethrowers to burn them out. We blew up caves with explosives. We did terrible things because we had no choice. And they kept fighting even when they had no chance of winning. Every position had to be taken by force. Every cave had to be sealed. It was industrial-scale killing, and it went on for 36 days. A Japanese soldier writes in his diary, found after his death, "We are all dead men. We know we cannot win, but we can make the Americans pay for this island with blood. Perhaps if we kill enough of them, they will not invade Japan. This is our last service to the Emperor. We will die here, far from home, but we will die doing our duty." By March 1945, American forces stand at Japan's doorstep. The Philippines are nearly liberated. Iwo Jima provides a base for bombing operations. Okinawa, the next target, will bring American forces within sight of Japan itself. The final battles approach, and they will prove even more costly than what came before. The human toll of the Pacific War between 1942 and 1945 defies comprehension. Military casualties on all sides exceed 2 million dead. Civilian deaths, primarily in China, the Philippines, and other occupied territories, number in the millions more. Each statistic represents an individual life ended, a family shattered, a future erased. The color film footage captures fragments of this immense human cost. Rows of bodies covered with ponchos on Pacific beaches, hospital ships overflowing with wounded, exhausted survivors sitting motionless after battle, and mass graves dug by bulldozers. American military casualties across the Pacific Theater total approximately 111,000 dead and 253,000 wounded. The Marine Corps, bearing the brunt of island assaults, suffers disproportionately. The 1st Marine Division lands on Guadalcanal with approximately 19,000 men. By December, disease and combat reduce them to fewer than 9,000 effective troops. On Iwo Jima, the 4th Marine Division counts over 7,000 casualties after 36 days, a casualty rate exceeding 30%. Entire battalions cease to exist after single battles. Naval losses at sea add thousands more to the death toll. Approximately 31,000 American sailors died during the Pacific War, many in circumstances offering no chance of survival. When ships take torpedo or kamikaze strikes below the waterline, men trapped in flooded compartments drown within minutes. Fire and explosions from magazine detonations leave little time to escape. The destroyer USS Johnston goes down during the battle off Samar with most of her crew. Survivors float in shark-infested waters for days before rescue. Of 627 crew members, only 141 survive. Japanese military casualties dwarf American losses. Approximately 2 million Japanese soldiers and sailors died during the Pacific War. The policy of fighting to the death transforms every battle into a massacre. On island after island, Japanese garrisons are annihilated. Guadalcanal cost Japan approximately 25,000 dead. Saipan adds another 30,000. Iwo Jima consumes 21,000. Okinawa kills over 100,000 Japanese troops. At war's end, hundreds of thousands more Japanese soldiers remain scattered across Pacific islands, isolated, starving, and forgotten. Cultural indoctrination teaches that surrender brings dishonor worse than death, betraying the emperor, family, and self. American forces capture approximately 41,000 Japanese military prisoners during the entire Pacific War, a minuscule number compared to millions engaged. Many of those captured are too badly wounded to resist or are unconscious when taken. The few who surrender consciously often face ostracism from fellow prisoners who consider them cowards. Civilian casualties in the Pacific War reach truly catastrophic numbers. In the Philippines, approximately 1 million civilians died during Japanese occupation and the Liberation Campaign. Japanese troops, retreating through Manila in February 1945, conduct systematic massacres, killing approximately 100,000 civilians in 1 month. American artillery, attempting to dislodge Japanese defenders, adds to the death toll. Survivors emerge from ruins to find their neighborhoods erased and their families dead. China suffers losses that defy calculation. Japanese occupation policies, deliberate starvation, forced labor, and military operations kill an estimated 15 to 20 million Chinese civilians between 1937 and 1945. The rape of Nanking in 1937 kills approximately 300,000 civilians. The three alls policy, kill all, burn all, loot all, depopulates entire regions. Chinese forced laborers die by the hundreds of thousands building railways and fortifications. In Southeast Asia, Japanese occupation kills millions through starvation and forced labor. The Burma Railway, constructed using Allied prisoners and Asian laborers, kills approximately 100,000 workers. The Bengal famine of 1943, caused partially by Japanese occupation of Burma, cutting rice supplies, kills approximately 3 million Indians. Approximately 4 million Indonesian civilians die during the occupation. The psychological trauma inflicted on survivors lasts lifetimes. American veterans return home with what doctors call combat fatigue, or shell shock, conditions now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Many cannot sleep without nightmares. Some turn to alcohol to numb memories. Others withdraw emotionally, unable to reconnect with families. The Marine Corps estimates that 90% of troops who see sustained combat suffer some degree of psychological damage. Many never fully recover. Japanese survivors face different but equally profound trauma. Soldiers who survive when their units are annihilated carry guilt for living while comrades died. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki create unique trauma categories. Survivors, called hibakusha, suffer radiation sickness, increased cancer rates, and social stigma. Many hide their survivor status to avoid discrimination. Allied prisoners of war face particularly grim fates. Japan treats captured soldiers with systematic brutality. Of approximately 140,000 Allied prisoners held by Japan, approximately 27% die in captivity, compared to 4% held by Germany. On the Bataan Death March in April 1942, Japanese forces march approximately 75,000 American and Filipino prisoners 65 miles in tropical heat with minimal food or water. Between 7,000 and 10,000 die during the march or in the first weeks of captivity. Prisoners work as slave labor in mines, factories, and construction projects, receiving starvation rations and no medical care. Men weighing 200 pounds at capture shrink to 90-pound skeletons. Disease sweeps through camps: dysentery, beriberi, malaria, cholera. Some prisoners are executed arbitrarily. The Palawan massacre in December 1944 kills 150 American prisoners burned alive in air raid shelters. The immediate aftermath of battles presents nightmarish scenes. Burial details face the grim task of collecting bodies decomposing rapidly in tropical heat. On some Pacific islands, the smell of death is detectable miles offshore. Many dead are never identified. They rest in graves marked unknown. The volcanic sand of Iwo Jima proves nearly impossible to dig, forcing burial teams to use explosives to create mass graves. Medical personnel struggle with overwhelming casualties and limited resources. Field hospitals operate constantly during major battles, surgeons working 36-hour shifts. Wounded men lie on stretchers waiting for surgery that may come too late. Blood supplies run short. Morphine becomes precious. Corpsmen perform triage, deciding who might be saved and who is beyond help. Those decisions haunt medical staff for the rest of their lives. Disease compounds combat casualties throughout the Pacific. Malaria infects hundreds of thousands of soldiers on both sides. Dengue fever, dysentery, typhus, and scrub typhus all take their toll. Jungle rot and tropical ulcers eat into flesh, causing permanent scarring. The combination of combat stress, malnutrition, disease, and climate breaks down the strongest men. Many Pacific veterans bear physical scars from wounds, disease, and malnutrition that mark them for life. One Navy corpsman later testifies, "I treated thousands of wounded Marines during the war. Some died in my arms, others I saved, but they lost limbs or eyes or their minds. The ones who haunted me most were the boys who called for their mothers as they died. They were so young, barely out of high school, and they died terrified and in agony on some island they'd never heard of before the war. I still hear them calling out at night." A survivor from Manila recalls, "The Japanese came to our neighborhood and went house to house. They killed everyone they found, even babies. My mother hid me in a closet and I heard her screaming. I was 8 years old. When American soldiers finally came, I was alone. Everyone I knew was dead. That was 70 years ago, and I still dream about it every night." The human cost of the Pacific War extends far beyond battlefield casualties. Families lose fathers, sons, and brothers. Children grow up without parents. Women become widows at 20. Communities lose entire generations of young men. The scars, physical and psychological, visible and invisible, affect millions of people for decades. The color footage preserves faces of the cost, the exhausted stares of combat veterans, the tears of refugees, the skeletal bodies of prisoners, and the silent dignity of men carrying their wounded comrades. These images testify to what was endured and can never be forgotten. The Pacific War between 1942 and 1945 fundamentally altered the course of World War II and reshaped the global balance of power for generations. The campaigns documented in color film, from Guadalcanal's jungles to Iwo Jima's volcanic slopes, represent more than military operations. They mark the definitive shift in Pacific dominance from Imperial Japan to the United States, the emergence of America as a global superpower, and the beginning of the end for European colonial empires in Asia. The strategic importance of these battles cannot be overstated. Guadalcanal stopped Japan's expansion and seized the initiative. For 6 months, both sides committed everything to a single island. Japan's failure there demonstrated that its defensive perimeter could be breached and its forces defeated. The psychological impact rippled through both militaries. American troops gained confidence. Japanese soldiers began to doubt victory was possible. From August 1942 forward, Japan fought a defensive war it could not win. The Central Pacific Offensive, launched with Tarawa and culminating in the Marianas, shattered Japan's strategic defense line. The capture of Saipan, Tinian and Guam placed B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. This development effectively sealed Japan's fate. American industry could produce bombers faster than Japan could shoot them down. American submarines strangled Japanese shipping, cutting the home islands off from raw materials and food supplies. By mid-1945, Japan was being starved and burned into submission even before atomic weapons entered the equation. The immediate political consequences of Allied victory in the Pacific reshaped Asia permanently. Japan's empire, built over decades of conquest, collapsed within months of surrender. Korea gained independence after 35 years of brutal occupation. The Philippines achieved full independence in 1946. European colonial powers attempted to reclaim their Asian territories, but found nationalist movements too strong to suppress. The Dutch lost Indonesia. France eventually lost Indochina after years of war. Britain granted independence to Burma and later to Malaya and Singapore. The Pacific War, fought ostensibly to preserve colonial empires, ultimately destroyed them. The human cost produced profound social changes in participating nations. In America, millions of men returned from Pacific service, fundamentally changed by what they experienced. The Greatest Generation mythology obscures the reality that many veterans struggled with trauma, alcoholism, and inability to adjust to civilian life. Society lacked the vocabulary or treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. Veterans were expected to resume normal lives without acknowledging what they endured. Many succeeded through sheer determination, building careers and families while carrying invisible wounds. Others never fully recovered. In Japan, defeat and occupation transformed society completely. The emperor, previously considered divine, announced he was human. Democracy replaced militarism. Women gained the vote. Land reform broke the power of feudal landlords. Education was reformed to remove militaristic indoctrination. The nation that launched the Pacific War with visions of Asian dominance emerged from occupation as a pacifist democracy constitutionally forbidden from maintaining offensive military forces. This transformation, imposed by American occupation authorities, proved lasting and profound. For Asian nations caught between Japanese occupation and Allied liberation, the war's legacy remained complex and painful. Chinese suffered more than any other people, with civilian deaths numbering in the tens of millions. The war strengthened Mao Zedong's communist movement, leading eventually to the Chinese Civil War and communist victory in 1949. The Philippines bore scars from both Japanese brutality and the destruction caused by liberation. Indonesia, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian nations emerged from occupation determined to resist any return to colonial status, setting the stage for decades of conflict. The military lessons learned in the Pacific fundamentally shaped modern amphibious warfare doctrine. Every aspect of current amphibious operations, from pre-landing reconnaissance to close air support coordination, evolved from Pacific War battles. The techniques developed to assault fortified islands remain relevant despite technological advances. The basic problem remains unchanged. Projecting force from sea to land against prepared defenses requires overwhelming firepower, detailed planning, and acceptance of casualties. Modern militaries study Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa when preparing for amphibious operations. The Pacific War demonstrated the crucial importance of logistics, industrial production, and technological innovation in modern warfare. Japan lost not because its soldiers lacked courage, but because America could produce ships, aircraft, and munitions at rates Japan could not match. The United States built more Essex-class carriers during the war than Japan built carriers total. American shipyards produced merchant vessels faster than German and Japanese submarines could sink them. This industrial might, combined with willingness to accept casualties and continue fighting, proved decisive. No amount of fighting spirit could overcome such material disparity. Today, the Pacific War is remembered differently in different nations. In America, it remains the Good War, a clear moral conflict against aggression. Museums and memorials honor veterans and commemorate battles. The flag raising on Iwo Jima remains an iconic image. Pearl Harbor serves as a reminder of vigilance against surprise attack. In Japan, memory remains contested. Some acknowledge wartime atrocities and aggression. Others minimize or deny them. The Yasukuni Shrine controversy, where war criminals are honored alongside ordinary soldiers, continues generating diplomatic tensions. In China and Korea, anger over Japanese wartime actions remains intense, complicated by perceptions that Japan has never adequately apologized or made amends. The color footage shot between 1942 and 1945 provides invaluable historical documentation. Unlike black and white newsreels, color film captures the war with unsettling clarity. The images make the conflict feel immediate and real in ways static photographs cannot. Future generations can see not just what happened, but can perceive the reality of combat, occupation, and liberation in vivid detail. The footage testifies to human capacity for both extraordinary courage and terrible cruelty. It documents sacrifice, suffering, and survival. Most importantly, it preserves faces and moments that might otherwise be forgotten. The lessons of the Pacific War remain relevant in the 21st century. The conflict demonstrated that democracies, when united and committed, can defeat totalitarian aggression despite initial setbacks. It proved that technological and industrial superiority, while crucial, cannot substitute for will to continue fighting regardless of cost. It showed that cultural differences in attitudes toward death, surrender, and military honor profoundly affect how wars are fought and ended. It revealed that civilian populations suffer disproportionately in total war, and that distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants becomes nearly impossible. Perhaps most importantly, the Pacific War's staggering human cost serves as warning against allowing aggressive nationalism, militarism, and territorial ambition to go unchecked. Japan's decision to launch war against China, then expand into Southeast Asia and the Pacific, ultimately brought destruction upon Japan itself. Millions died, cities burned, and an empire collapsed. The color film captures fragments of this immense tragedy. Young men dying on beaches, civilians fleeing burning cities, prisoners starving in camps, and survivors staring into cameras with expressions of exhaustion, trauma, and loss. As historian John Dower later reflects, the Pacific War was fought with a savagery that shocked even veterans of the European theater. Racial hatred, cultural misunderstanding, and totalitarian ideology combined to produce combat in which quarter was rarely asked or given. The color footage from those battles shows us not glory, but horror, not triumph, but tragedy. It reminds us that war, whatever its necessity, destroys something essential in those who fight it and in the societies that wage it. The battles documented in color between 1942 and 1945 ended with Japan's surrender in August 1945, but their effects echo through subsequent decades. The men who fought, the civilians who endured, and the societies that survived all bear permanent marks. The footage remains, testimony to what happened on Pacific Islands, whose names are burned into history: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. These images ensure that future generations cannot forget the price paid to defeat aggression and restore peace. That memory, captured in color on film that survives, remains their lasting legacy.